China just nearly shot down an Australian jet, and you need to know what just happened. But Australia said, quote, "We strongly condemn this unsafe and unprofessional manoeuvre." Now what's important is what China just did in order for Australia to say this, and it's really quite a big deal. In fact, it's such a big deal that if it had gone wrong, then Australia would probably be at war with China right now. And so what did China do to cause this reaction? Well, a Chinese fighter jet just fired its flares at an Australian jet that was flying near to China. But the reason China did that is actually really important, and to be honest with you, it doesn't look like China are the ones in the wrong here. Today, an Australian intelligence plane was flying over the South China Sea, really quite close to China, possibly spying on China. And in response to that, China sent a fighter jet to scare it off, and well, to be honest, it worked. China said, quote, "The Australian aircraft seriously infringed upon China's sovereignty, and it had to be expelled." And as Australia said, the way China did that was by flying their fighter jet right up alongside this Australian intelligence plane and then firing its air defence flares. Now, if this had gone wrong and these flares had hit the Australian intelligence plane, then it would have shot it down and it would have been a lot worse than it currently is. Luckily it didn't, but either way it's really quite a big deal because it nearly did. Really big news, but if you're new here, this is my daily news recap where I summarise all of the most important news from the last 24 hours, which you hopefully haven't heard about, so you'll learn something. First, I don't know if you can hear this, but there's like police sirens next to me. A bit stupid. Right, next up though, staying on China, the Chinese president is about to meet with Trump, and what's important is what they're going to talk about. And not only are they meeting in a few weeks, but Trump also said, quote, "I'll be visiting China fairly early next year as well." Now you need to know what they're going to be talking about in this meeting, and I'll tell you that in a moment, but first, you should know what's actually happening. In fact, today, Trump announced that he's doing a tour of Asia, and he's going to be visiting a lot of countries and their leaders. However, the important part, he's going to be meeting with the Chinese President Xi Jinping in South Korea, close to the border with North Korea, China's ally. And to be honest with you, it's likely he'll meet Kim Jong-un if he's in South Korea, because he's, well, already there. But it's worth knowing, on this tour of Asia, he's also going to be visiting Japan, South Korea, obviously, because he's there, and quite a few other countries. But now, what you wanted. What are Xi Jinping and Trump going to talk about? And Trump spoke on that. He said, quote, "We'll see what we can do, but we expect to reach quite a fair deal." And Trump also said, quote, "I believe after we leave South Korea, we're going to have a very good relationship with China." Now, I'm going to be honest with you, most of the issues between the US and China at the moment are related to trade and tariffs, so it's likely they're going to talk about tariffs. But this really is quite a big deal. If they can agree on a trade deal, then it means the relations between the US and China will get quite a lot better. Plus the fact Trump announced he's visiting China next year, which will be really quite a big deal. I need a drink a minute though, I don't have a drink. Got one. Right, now moving to the other side of the world, Colombia just cut off all relations with the US, and the reason why is not what you think. A few weeks ago, the Colombian president was kicked out of the US for a speech he gave, and you need to know what's caused this today. But first, yesterday the US bombed a Colombian boat with Colombian citizens on board. And at the same time they did that, the US said it was to do with drugs being on board the boat, and the US said, quote, "The Colombian president is an illegal drug leader." But now the important part, in response to the US bombing that Colombian drug boat yesterday in the Caribbean, Colombia has just ended all relations with the US. In fact, Colombia has even withdrawn their ambassador to the US, so they probably won't even be speaking anymore. But to be honest with you, the US didn't care about this. They doubled down on what they said, and they said, quote, "If Colombia doesn't take more steps to combat the drugs, we will do it ourselves, and it won't be done nicely." And the Colombian Interior Minister responded to that statement by the US, and he said, quote, "Colombia views these remarks by the US as a threat of invasion or military action against Colombia." So Colombia fears the US is going to invade them due to the drugs that flow from Colombia into the US. And because of that, Colombia just cut off all relations with the US, and they've recalled their ambassador to the US. To be honest with you, the situation in the Mediterranean is escalating quite a bit. The US has bombed Venezuela and now Colombia. Having another drink. Right, now something completely different. Canada just said they will arrest Netanyahu for war crimes if he visits Canada. Canada said, quote, "The actions of Netanyahu were explicitly designed to end the Palestinian state." And what you need to know is what else Canada said as well as that, and it gets way worse. But first, Canada actually seemed serious about this, and they were really annoyed at Israel when they said it. I'll get to what else they said in a moment, as well as saying that they will arrest Netanyahu, but you also need to know that Canada has already ended all trade and aid to Israel. In fact, Canada did that a while ago, so they've distanced themselves for a long time. But on to what else Canada said. The Canadian Prime Minister said, quote, "Our goal is a free and viable Palestinian state, living side by side in peace and security with the state of Israel." Now, of course, it's worth knowing, Canada has said they're going to arrest Netanyahu, but that's not because they want to send him to prison themselves. It's for a different reason. Canada has actually said they're siding with the ICC, the International Criminal Court, and they're going to arrest Netanyahu if he visits because that's what the ICC has demanded. Despite the ceasefire in Gaza, the ICC has still issued the arrest warrant for Netanyahu, meaning any country that's a member of the ICC is obliged to arrest him. But this is really a possibility now, although I'll be honest, it's unlikely Netanyahu is going to visit Canada now because they've said they will arrest him. I'm going to have another drink because I'm in Dubai and it's quite hot. In fact, let me show you the view because the view's pretty cool. Right, so this is the view. It's pretty cool. We've got lots of big buildings over there. And another big building there. And that one's pretty cool. Right, anyway, should be doing other things than showing you the view. Right, anyway, something a bit more important. The UK is about to start shooting down Russian drones, and you need to know about this. The UK said, quote, "We will be shooting down unidentified drones over UK military sites." Now, this is really quite a big deal, but you need to know what's caused this, and that's unidentified drones flying over Europe last month. If you don't know, for the last 3 or 4 weeks, loads of unidentified drones have been flying over really sensitive sites across Europe, specifically in Denmark. In fact, Denmark reported loads of these unidentified drones flying over things like airports, military bases, etc. To be honest with you though, Denmark was just being stupid. Rather than shooting down the drones because they didn't know where they were from, instead Denmark just let them fly and they stared at the drones for 2 or 3 days whilst they shut their airports and waited for them to leave. But it's worth knowing that NATO and France later accused a Russian cargo ship of being behind these drone sightings over Denmark. They didn't release any proof of that. It's weird how a cargo ship would have anything to do with the drones anyway, but regardless, they still link the two together. But because of this, the UK has now ordered their troops to shoot down any unidentified drones that fly over British military bases. And so now, any drones that are flying over British military bases, either in the UK or presumably in British military bases abroad, will now be shot down. And they're going to be shot down with no questions asked, regardless of whose country they've come from. Quite a big deal, but to be fair, the drones need to be shot down, because if you've got random drones flying above your military base, they need to be shot down. It goes without saying. Denmark. Right, back to China though. China just unveiled the world's largest military drone and it can carry nukes. And you need to know, China said, quote, "This is the most dangerous aircraft ever built." Now what's important is this Chinese drone is actually a stealth bomber, like the American B-2 bomber, which carried out strikes on Iran. But the part that makes this really quite a big deal is that unlike the B-2 bomber, this drone doesn't need a pilot. And that means that China will be able to fly way more of these stealth bomber drones than America will be able to fly of their B-2 bombers, because China doesn't need to waste time training pilots. And to top it off, it's classed as a stealth bomber, and according to China, it's virtually undetectable by radar. And that means it'll bomb you and kill you before you even know it's there. Now, the reason I'm talking about this is because today a video came out of it flying, and it's the first time it's been seen flying, so presumably this is just a test flight. But because this is the first time it's been seen flying, obviously we don't have much information on it. It's really early days. But still, this is really quite a big deal. It's quite a scary bomber, and it's probably going to change the future of China's military. Right, anyway, that's all the news for today. If you learned something, leave a subscribe, but I'll see you again tomorrow for the next daily news recap.